Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, Sure You Can Have Your Car. 14 years ago, almost to the day, I surprised my husband with the announcement that I was pregnant with baby number 3. He took such pride in our first 2 that I thought he'd be happy. He announced that he was leaving me for his girlfriend, who is also pregnant. He takes his clothes and our minivan and moves in with her, leaving me with 2 kids under the age of 5, no vehicle, no job, and no money. My closest family member was about 1,000 miles south of me, but I had no way of getting a hold of anybody at that time. Eventually, he begins to feel guilty, at least, I think that's what happened, and he gave me a car so I could at least drive to the grocery store and buy food for his kids. Believe me, if I'd had enough money, I'd have taken the car and driven back to my family. After a while, the rumor mill starts spreading that I'm using the car to visit my boyfriend. In actuality, I was out looking for a job, and it got back to my estranged husband. He's one of those, I don't want you, but nobody else can have you, types. He came around to my house in the middle of the night and took the tags off the car he gave me. I confronted him about it and he told me that the tags had expired and he needed to take the car to get the tags renewed. That meant he'd have to get the keys from me since I had the only copies. I'll admit that I was young and naive, but I wasn't stupid. I knew he was lying, but didn't find out until later why. I took his car and, very carefully, drove it to a friend's house. I parked it at her house and she drove me home. He came to her house and tried to get her to give him the keys. Instead, she chased him off her property. He complained to me about how she treated him and I told him that he shouldn't have threatened her on her property. The next day, I decided to give him back his car. After I made a few improvements, I busted out the windows, dented the car and sugared the tank. Let me tell you, it felt damn good to let my pregnancy hormones loose. Then, I called him to come get his car and left. I wasn't there, but my friend said he was livid. A few weeks later, he tried to press charges against her and seek damages. Being the good friend that I am, and seeing how it was my fault, I offer to testify for my friend. I go into court, the picture of complete innocence. I was 23, but could easily still pass for 15 or 16 years old. I told the judge that I was the one who had damaged the car. The charges against my friend were dropped and my husband's girlfriend was livid. Apparently, even though the car was in his name, she'd paid for it. She wanted to press charges. She actually began to scream at me in the courtroom. I tried not to laugh at her, a grown woman who was twice my age, having a hissy fit like a 2-year-old and screaming obscenities. Their lawyer escorted me out of the courtroom while my husband calmed down his girlfriend and sat down with me to talk about the consequences of what I'd done. I told him the whole story as to why I'd busted out the windows. The look of pure disgust that their lawyer gave them when they walked out of the courtroom was awesome. He told them that he wouldn't take the case if they filed charges and then turned to me and offered to help me if they did. The next one is titled Don't Mess With My Family. My father married step monster. SM came from a different country where it is common for ladies there to marry foreigners and use them to move to our country, then pop out a child or 2 to lock him down. SM and Dad frequently borrowed money from Nana, never paying it back, and their house was full of useless crap. But here is where the real story starts. My grandfather had Alzheimer's, so it was decided that a granny flat would be built so my grandparents would live while Dad and new family would move into the main house. My grandparents would put a mortgage on their home to build the granny flat, but Dad and SM were fully responsible for the payments. My grandfather passes away before completion or any of the legal paperwork dividing up the ownership had been signed. My dad and SM go to my grieving Nana and have her sign a 55-45 split. Dad and SM still frequently borrow money from Nana, obviously not making the mortgage payments. SM almost left Dad for a Nigerian scammer before Christmas. Dad got diagnosed with cancer 3 months later. SM started to show her true colors. She loved to play martyr to all the friends they had, claiming she had to do everything since my half-sisters didn't help around the house and that my older sister and I never saw our father. Easy to sell since both of us had full-time jobs and lived over an hour away. She also had two of these friends try to confront our half-sisters but instead ended up facing the wrath of our entire family and two of Dad's oldest friends. SM started to lock their bedroom door, denying all access to him, especially Nana. He was her only child and she had recently been diagnosed with Alzheimer herself. Also, family was the most important thing to Dad, so being cut off really hurt him, but was sold as, "None of them want to see you." My older sister talked to Nana about changing her will and having the two of us named power of attorney and guardians. SM kicked up a fuss about this because the current will left pretty much everything to Dad. So if my dad died and the will wasn't changed, she would get it all. The will was changed so that everything would be split equally between the 5 grandchildren. I arranged for an assessment to see what community services Nana would be eligible for or need. SM found out and decided to sit in and try to tell the worker Nana didn't need any services, as SM would, for the first time in 5 years, take care of her. Also known as Control Nana. I shut her down using her martyrdom against her. Dad got worse, so my whole family rushed to see Dad. SM lets us in to see him. We're all talking, comforting him and each other. But what is SM doing? Texting some random dude at my dad's beside as he is literally dying. Dad passes a day and a half later. I had to call the ambulance while one of my half-sisters had to do CPR on him. SM is nowhere to be found at the time. I had to tell family while SM called all her friends and had them flood the house while her children grieved with us. She didn't console or comfort them in any way ever. At the wake where Dad's real friends and family are, we informed some of her friends about her actions. They are disgusted and tell the rest. Within a month, SM has shacked up with a new boyfriend and is trying to have a kid to lock him in, but she has gone through menopause. SM started to visit Nana when our side of the family weren't there to talk crap about us. Once it becomes clear Nana can't change her will to include SM, she stops visiting even though she lives 6 feet away. Nana's health declines and a second assessment decides she'd probably be better off in assisted living. This means selling the houses that SM has a share in and hasn't made a single payment on since Dad's death. A house that's been trashed and a granny flat that doesn't match the council-approved plans. Sister and I make sure that legally the mortgage, cleaning costs, skip hires and building costs to get the granny flat up to code come out of SM's share. So the house sold for $600K. SM got $60K once everything was all settled. SM has blown through it all in 6 months and was thrown out by her boyfriend. The next one is titled, How My Uncle Tried to Pull One Over on Me. This story starts off back when I was 15. My grandmother started to have problems with her health. In 5 years she had 3 hip replacements and a knee replacement. Normally family would come together and try to help, well, not my family. Her husband, they had separated years before, was too busy getting drunk and chain smoking his life away to bother helping her out. When I asked him to help her out, his response was, "What's in it for me?" Her daughter, my mother, wasn't any better. She wanted a live-in babysitter for my 10 other siblings. That was a no-go. Then we get to her son. He wants to help, but his new wife, Reed, married for 3 years, doesn't want his dying mother to ruin her house. So now she has no one, or so she thinks. I take it upon myself to do what no one else wants to do. I drop out of high school. Don't worry, I put myself through online high school and got my diploma, and move in with her to take care of her full time. For the next few years she and I live happily together. We went shopping, played World of Warcraft together, and just generally had a good time. My family were hit or miss. My mother took my 12 siblings. 2 had moved out but wanted to stay close to Mama, so they moved with her, and moved down to Texas. We all lived in Anchorage, Alaska. My grandfather passed away from his own stupidity. He did not want to quit smoking to save his own life, and my uncle would only come over to check on her when he needed something. 9 times out of 10 he wanted her pain pills that she got from her numerous surgeries. I did my best to keep her happy. I'm not going to lie and say we were happy 100% of the time. We had struggles, but she and I worked together and pulled through. She was ecstatic when I met my husband, and she was even happier when she found out that I wouldn't be leaving her behind like everyone else did when they found their other Hales. I had had a long heart-to-heart with my husband and told him before we even started dating that she was my world and that I would give up almost anything for her, and he agreed. She was there when I gave birth to my son. She even got to cut the umbilical cord. She cried because she thought she would hurt him. And then everything started to go downhill. In 2014, at the start of the year, we found out she had arthritis in her back, but the doctor couldn't pinpoint where it was, so he wanted to pin her entire back. She was scared, so we put it off and went in search of a second opinion. Then we got the bad news in August, on my birthday of all days. She had cancer, she had leukemia. We found out on a Monday and Wednesday morning at 1 a.m. She and I were on a plane to Seattle, Washington. She was scared and so was I, but she had survived ovarian cancer back in 2007, so why couldn't she survive this one? For a year and a half we fought it, 9 rounds of chemo, the hair loss, the loss of appetite, the pain. I attempted to reach out to my family to get them to come and visit her, spend time with her. My mother? Couldn't be bothered, call me when she's dead, were her words. My uncle? Nah, he didn't want to see her wasting away, I want to remember her when she was healthy. So my husband and I continued to give her the support and help she needed to make it through. Then we got the good news. She was in remission. We did it. Now that didn't mean we stopped everything, no, we still had appointments and blood work, but no more chemo. We were so happy, things were working out. Even my uncle started to come by to spend time with her. Then a few days later my uncle told my grandmother that he was moving to Seattle, Washington, and that he wanted her to come with him. She, in the end, refused because she did not want to be away from my son, husband and I. On top of that, they were moving to a 2-story house and all of the bedrooms were on the top floor. So my uncle moved and we settled in for what we thought was going to be another happy 30+ years. Women in my family live to be about 90-ish before they pass. But then my world came crashing down one night near the end of August. I wake up to a tapping on the wall at the head of my bed. It's coming from my grandmother's room. So I rush out of bed and try to get into her room, come to find out she had fallen and her head had went through the sheetrock wall. I did what any normal woman would do at the time. I screamed like a little girl. My husband in all his naked glory came running into the room, picked up Grandma and put her on the bed. I called her doctor and the doctor rerouted me to the ambulance that was prepped for just situations like this. Then I got my son and myself ready while my husband did the same. I got to ride in the ambulance with my grandmother while my husband stayed home with our son. The hospital did blood work and x-rays, CAT scans and a stress test. Nothing. They found nothing. So we went home, and scheduled an appointment for the next morning with her doctor. Next day we went in and were greeted at the office door with a, "Hi, we need to take her back to the ER to admit her to the hospital for observation." Ooh, from what I remember it was the fastest way to get her admitted to the hospital because her cancer doctor wasn't a doctor at the hospital, she was just renting the office space. Yeah. I gave up asking a long time ago. When I called my uncle to keep him updated I was told that she can't give up, I don't want to be an orphan. Come to find out, she wasn't in remission, not even close. Her cancer had spread, it was everywhere and they couldn't save her. So after about a week in the hospital they sent her home on Friday, September 4th, and we got to spend 2 glorious days with her, reminding her that we loved her and that she wouldn't be forgotten and that our son would remember her. She even got to pick out her urn. And then at 3:09 a.m. on Sunday, September 6th she passed away in her sleep. And that's when the crap hit the fan. My uncle, who was now living in Seattle, was informed of my grandmother's passing. He went into what my husband and I call jackass mode. It was all about him, what he was getting, how he didn't want to pay for her cremation and how he wanted her ashes sent to him. So I did my best while dealing with my grief, my husband's grief and our son asking, "Where Nana? Nana's sleeping? Nana go bye-bye?" I can't explain how crushing it was. I attempted to reach out to my uncle and explain that my grandmother was to be cremated in a few days, not even going to pretend that I know the process, and that the gentleman that was working with us was willing to take payments for her cremation. No, I was told by my uncle, "We have to pay for it now and put her to rest. I'll pay for the bill in full, but you will pay me back." When I answered him with, "No, I have to move my family on what Nana left us and what we have in savings. I can try to pay you back when we get moved and find jobs, but that wasn't good enough." So a few days go by and I'm trying to get together the money to pay for her cremation and I get a call. "Mrs. M? This is blank crematorium. I want to inform you that your grandmother is being cremated tomorrow and her remains will be ready in the morning. I suggest that you be here before we open." I'm confused but agree. I make a few calls around to family and find out that my uncle had taken out a loan and paid for the cremation. But after we had talked, he demanded that the crematorium send my grandmother's ashes to him and that I wasn't to know till the ashes were sent. So I get into my okay ducket mode. I show up at the crematorium at 5:30 a.m. and I sit and wait. When they open, I am the second one through the doors. I meet with one of the office staff and find out that my uncle has been harassing them all week. When will her ashes be ready? Why isn't she at the top of your list? She needs to be put to rest now, etc. So the staff is more than happy to release my grandmother's ashes to me. So I sign for her ashes and take her home. Now one of my grandmother's last wishes was for her ashes to be put in tiny urn necklaces for those she was close to have. So I take her necklaces and send out the few that I can, the family that we're too far away to be of any help other than emotional support. And then I get to my uncle. Now I want to forgive and forget, but at every turn my uncle started biting at me and my husband. Telling family that they overdosed Nana on her morphine, they wanted to kill her, they never loved her, they just wanted her money, etc. So I give in. I wanted revenge and I wanted to hurt. Another of her last wishes was that my husband and I, were to take her PFD money that we get once a year for living in the state of Alaska and use that money to move. This was told to all of us, my uncle included. My uncle, being one of her heirs, was legally able to take it, but he had agreed to hand it to us so we could use it to move. What does he do? After Grandma passed, he called up the state and took it. We only found out 2 weeks after the fact, when her PFD never showed up in her bank account that I had control of. So what do? I make sure to send out her necklaces. Everyone gets one but my uncle. Everyone gets an obituary clipping but my uncle. I do everything I can to keep him from getting his hands on her ashes. From what I've gotten through family and family friends as well as Facebook, he is raging that he had to pay for everything, $1,582.73 for just her cremation and nothing else, and he hasn't gotten anything to remember her by. And then I found the cherry to top my cake. As we were packing up to move and going through Grandma's belongings, I found a hand-crocheted blanket that my grandmother had made for my uncle before she passed. Looks like my son has a new big boy's blanket. So now I sit here a little over a year later, sharing this story with you all, and I can't help but think back and smile at the fact that we ended up with not only her ashes but her mementos as well. I know life isn't done throwing curveballs at me yet. I'm not dead, but I think my family and I will be okay. The last one is titled, "Neighbor posts pictures of my son all over town so I help his tenants sue him." I live in a small town next to a city that really has a little town feel to it, but not without it feeling like I'm living in the boonies. I moved in my house 15 years ago on a street that has maybe 5 houses on it. I get along with everybody near me to the point that we have a street party 3 times a year to get to know each other. The one no-show is always the guy that lives across from me. Let's call him passive-aggressive neighbor. He owns and lives in a duplex that is kind of tucked behind some trees and has a paved driveway that leads to it. But it is open enough that I can see his renter's side of the house. He's the one guy that has lived on this street longer than me. For the first 10 years I never saw the guy. He was a recluse, and I recognized that. The first strange thing that happened was when I hired painters to paint my house. Even though I have ample parking, for some reason the painters wanted to park on his side of the street. The next day concrete blocks were lined up on the side of the street of his property. Which was kind of ridiculous considering a car has never ever parked there in the 10 years I had lived there. Also, as I said, his house is down a long driveway, but whatever. Like I said, I have plenty of parking, and at the time I thought it was funny. Now my revenge story. A year and a half ago, my wife received a letter with no return address and no name in the letter. What it was a passive-aggressive letter saying, "Hello, Fluffysharky's wife, you are a person that knows a lot of people around here. Can you please make sure these boys stay off of my property?" And in this letter were printed photos of 3 boys. One of them was our 7-year-old son. One of the other boys was my son's friend that lived next to this guy, and the boys were using his driveway to cut to his friend's house. Now I was thinking the guy could have had some balls and knocked on my door and talked to me, but it was a fair enough request, so the 3 boys and their parents had a meeting at my house where we told them under no reason are they to go on his property again. All the boys said, "Okay, no problem." It was during this time I found out that the father of my son's friend had an ongoing legal battle with the PA neighbor about the property line. 2 days later, I get a knock on my door, and it was another neighbor that lived down the road, and he handed me a printed sign saying, "If these boys are seen on my property again, I will call the police," and printed on it was the same 3 pictures of my son and his friends. The friendly neighbor then told me that this was posted on every power line and street light post in a 6-block radius. So the nice neighbor and I walked around and removed them all. But I was upset. Who does that? So, I took all the signs and the PA letter to the police station. The officer basically said, he is a bad neighbor, but he did nothing illegal. I again talked to my son and asked him if he has been on his property again, and he said, no way. I then showed him the letter and the signs and told him, this guy is pretty creepy, please stay away. So, in the time from this incident to last summer nothing has happened. But the father of my son's friend suddenly passed away. This forced my son's friend and his mum to move away. This summer, my son, now 9, was playing in front of my house when a young boy came from the renter's side of this house and said that he and his single dad just moved in. So of course they became good friends. I then told the boy's father the whole story about his landlord and my son, and in no way can he ever come to his house, but his son is welcomed any time in mine. About a month later, single dad comes to our house and shows me one of PA neighbor's famous letters about his lease. It is for only 2 parking spots and he is violating his lease. I guess his girlfriend had been parking on the driveway, with plenty of space I might add, at night mostly. Also, he was working on his motorcycle, which is also against his lease. Single dad had been living there for 1 month and was already getting evicted. So here was where I could get my petty revenge and told him to go ahead and use my land for his girlfriend to park for his booty calls and to work on his bike. A couple of days later, I get a knock at my door and it's a man I have never seen before. It turns out to be PA neighbor, and he wanted to discuss about his tenant's girlfriend parking in front of my house. I told him that I gave him her permission to park there. He then started to argue with me and I said, hey look, I don't own the land in front of my house, the city does. What do you expect me to do? Put cement blocks in front of my house or take a picture of the girlfriend and post it everywhere? I then told him to duck off and slammed the door in his face. The next week I get a text. Single dad's girlfriend's car had been entered, she didn't lock it, and the glove compartment had been rifled through. An old phone was taken and another passive-aggressive unsigned letter saying not to park there. So with no proof the police could not do anything to his landlord and said it was a civil matter. Luckily, I had a camera set up on my house and I sent the video of PA neighbor going through her car and I emailed it to single dad with a statement of what PA neighbor has done to us in the past. Single dad moved out a week later but went ahead and sued his landlord. I just found out that with the help from me, single dad won his lawsuit and got $8,000 from my neighbor. Thanks for listening.